Good afternoon, everyone. We are here today for the April 4th version of the Advisory Committee meeting. So we will start by doing a roll call. I think we'll do that administratively.
Jeff Sims,
Here.
Mike Williams,
Here.
Brian McCarthy,
Here virtually.
Jonathan Scott,
Here.
Brian Pissarro,
Here.
Michael English, Cal Hardy, Bob Frey, Anna Quinones, Clay Hollis, Gina Evans, Christine Bolnois, Leland Dykes, Marcelo Taverni, Julie Ham.
Mark Hudson for Julie Ham.
Thank you. Danny Jorgensen,
Oh, she's here. She's on a call.
thank you. Jay Collins,
Present.
Danny.
Melissa Leinhart, Jennifer Malone,
Jennifer Malone here.
Nicole Sutton,
Nicole Sutton here.
Sarah Caper,
Here.
thank you. Gina, do you have a quorum in the room?
Yes, yes, we do. Do you do this next item or does our chair?
I'll ask him to. Chair Sims, would you please call a vote of consent for remote member participation?
Yes.
We have added this to the agenda. This item is going to be on our agenda templates now because we are kind of transitioning to what it used to be before as far as attendance. And really, it's a requirement now that TAC members or all our committee members are present, but sometimes you can't make it. And we want to give the ability for those who are members that are remote to be able to cast their vote on items that come for action. So that's up to this group. We can tell them no and make that vote or however you see fit. But Jeff, if you want to just present that kind of motion there to the committee and see.
Okay, so you need to make the motion or I guess normally you can't make the motion.
Yeah, that just kind of weird.
But we'll do it conventional and I'll just kind of, I'll propose it the way we normally handle the quorum because I'm not an expert on this stuff, but so what it sounds like, I got a better handle on it now. I think this is an effort to allow remote participants to still have a say in the ability to make a motion in future proceedings. So I think it needs to officially be declared. So at this point, we're looking for a motion for someone to state that we will allow remote committee member participants to be involved in some of the official proceedings.
So this is Jay Collins. I'll make a motion for a vote of consent for remote member participation.
Very good.
This is Mike Williams. I'll make the second, but I think we should clarify or kind of note specifically who those participants are that are participating remotely for the meeting. You know, it's A, B, C, these 2 people or 3 people.
Sure, Gail, do you have that handy where you could just let us know what members are remote today?
I'm still working my way through that signed in list. However, at this point in time, I have Brian McCarthy remote, Leland Dykes remote. Hang on a second, somebody else just popped in. Okay. I think that's all I have remote at this time.
Okay, very good. And then I'm gonna ask for clarification. This decision, this motion will be for permanent movement going forward, if I'm correct. And I guess the caveat would be that anyone participating remotely needs to be established at the beginning of the meeting. Is that
I think we'll do it every meeting.
we're gonna have the same vote every
I
meeting?
think so. Yes.
Do you know if that was the intent? Was this gonna be a one-time thing or one we're gonna do every meeting?
It's my understanding after a lot of discussion that this is going to be an every meeting intent, but Beth is here and so she can clarify.
Oh, there she's over there. That's fine. I just, this is, new ground for us, so we're just want to make sure we understand each other.
I know. Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right? Beth Alden, TPO director, and yes, it's kind of new ground for us too. But we had been identifying that committee members and board members who are voting members can participate as full members remotely, as long as there was a local declaration of emergency. We were using that local declaration of emergency as a justification for that. Now that the local declaration of emergency has expired, we're going back to the previous standard, which is provided by the Florida Attorney General's office, which is that people participating remotely, their members participating remotely and voting remotely, there must be some extenuating circumstance. We know that now that we've gone back to regular room capacity in the Plan Hillsborough room, everybody's sitting right next to each other. There may still be some people who have health concerns or who have vulnerabilities. We're not asking for any protected health information from anybody. So if you all tell us that you need to participate remotely, we're going to take that at face value. But we do need to have some kind of vote of acceptance at every meeting, just going back to that pre-pandemic standard of remote member participation. So yes, the intent is for it to be at every meeting.
Okay, I mean, that helps clarify it, and I guess I'm just, if we can have, language that's easy to reference each time, since this is going to be a regular thing, that it can probably be on the agenda, just kind of similar to what it is, but now that we understand it, I think it'll be good. So with that, we have a motion in a second. Yes, Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. I just had one question. I believe it might be for Ms. Alden, or maybe for Gail. If a virtual member should show up late and they are a voting member, however, they miss roll call, do they need to announce themselves? Are they not eligible to vote? How would that work?
I guess it depends on how you frame your motion.
Okay, so.
Okay.
If you just wanted to make a motion to allow remote member participation and leave it at that, I mean, for the course of this meeting, then presumably that would cover people who join a little late.
Yeah, I'm okay with, I know some people who run a little behind, I'm okay with people, but not putting the stigma on.
I just wanted to make sure we didn't do something that actually disenfranchised somebody by making an emotion and all.
I think, and I believe your motion was pretty open. I mentioned and kind of clarifying that maybe it's the beginning of the meeting, but yeah, to re-clarify, the motion is meant to be open for committee members that are in attendance throughout the duration of the meeting. Okay. So if that's understood by everyone, I think, excuse me, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Sorry, he draw attention to, but he just.
Showing up late while you guys are talking about people showing up late.
Representing the board is here.
Okay, so if you didn't, just to clarify that, if you didn't notice, Clay Halls is here in person now, and eager to participate. So next up would be public comment. Do we have any member from the public? None are visible present in the room. Do we have any online virtual? Okay, it appears we don't. So with that, we will move forward with the approval of the March 7th meetings. So they are part of the agenda packet and quite thorough. I've noticed that there's been kind of some point in the last several months, like a assessment of how they're done, and they're very thorough, which I appreciate. So do we have any comments or questions on the meetings? Any notes?
Motion to approve as presented.
That was Jay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Nicole Sutton with the second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. So we are coming up to the action items. One thing I wanted to kind of mention, it looks like we're going to have a pretty full agenda. So where possible, if any of the presenters can kind of streamline and try to keep it to 10 minutes or less if possible. Certainly, if you need more to be thorough, that's okay. But where possible, if you can streamline it, we appreciate it. So first up is, I believe it's Allison with the storm evacuation.
Excuse me, Chair, one moment. I do have Bob Fry. He has logged in virtually as well.
Okay, all right, welcome, Bob. Okay, so are we ready for the first item? I think it's Allison.
It's Karen, and I'm not going to mispronounce her last name, is the actual presenter. I don't know if Allison is going to stage.
No, thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to turn it directly over to Karen Kisileski with Cambridge Systematics.
Okay.
So good afternoon, everybody. As Allison mentioned, I'm Karen Kisileski, the consultant project manager for this study, the Storm Evacuation Forecast and Shelter in Place Scenario Study. Just really briefly, I want to show you what we're going to talk about today. If I can get my screen back moving, there we go. We're talking a little bit about the purpose, the issues that came up, strategies we looked at, and then of course the recommendations, which are of most importance to you all. As a study overview, I mean, we went into this with the hypothesis of what can we do to improve evacuation during emergencies without the need to widen roads. And so we wanted to look at issues and strategies to be able to do that. And so in our first step, we kind of went to the residents and businesses of Hillsborough and asked them what are their major concerns with evacuations. We did that through some polling during an open house as well as an online survey, and then used some additional survey results from the University of South Florida and Florida International University to help us identify issues of importance regarding evacuations and sheltering. And then once we had those, and I will go through those in a minute here, once we had those, we identified a series of strategies to kind of address those that were strategies that did not include lane widening. And then we evaluated each of those, those strategies in terms of effectiveness and productivity and came up with some recommendations. And before we went to the recommendations, we did do a survey, an online survey to try to gauge people's reactions to the strategies in terms of acceptance and whether they thought they might be effective. So just really quickly, from the polling results, we heard obviously that uncertainty about a storm is, of course, the biggest factor in deciding whether to evacuate or not. We don't know where it may locate, how strong it'll be. But after that, traffic congestion is a major concern. People often mention that everyday traffic congestion leads them to believe that evacuating during an emergency would be even more difficult. And being able to be with family and friends, including with pets, particularly for people without personal vehicles, being able to have transportation access was important. And then while people didn't bring up cost as a major issue during evacuations, they did mention that many still needed to go to their jobs. So there are some access issues as well related to that. We divided the topics into 5 areas, which were congestion during evacuations, evacuation operations from a transportation perspective, from a transit or a paratransit perspective, event-related communications, and then event and behaviors affecting evacuation and sheltering. Because congestion was so high on the priority list, we wanted to evaluate where those congestion hotspots may be occurring during an evacuation. So we looked at Hurricane Irma and speed data during evacuations with Hurricane Irma and helped use that information to help inform the development of these 10 freeway and 10 arterial hotspot locations in terms of where congestion is most projected to occur during an evacuation. Not surprising on the freeways, that's I-75 and then I-4 primarily heading east. When it comes to the arterials, they are spotted throughout Hillsborough County, but you will see that Bruce B. Downs and Fletcher in particular and that north central section is an an area with quite a bit of congestion during evacuation, mostly because of the north and the northeast aspects to it, as well as some of the Dale Mabry sections and some hot spots like in Sun City Center and Mango Road and along into the airport. I forgot to mention that, US 31 and into the airport. We asked people in that last survey whether they felt that those, we found the right locations. Generally speaking, you know, 5 to 16% said they had experienced congestion in those locations during a hurricane, but obviously the perception or expectation is even higher with most of those locations, people expecting congestion upward of over 40% of the people expecting that. We wanted to evaluate this, some strategies, as I mentioned, that did not include road widening. So you'll see on this list 6 main strategies that we looked at. The 3 in magenta were ones we actually evaluated a little bit further with some modeling. Just to kind of go through them really quickly, I think everybody's familiar with reversible lanes, that they're really beneficial. They can go east when you need to go east, go west when you need to go west. Emergency shoulder use is the interstate ability to start using the shoulders that is been applied through I-75 and other locations throughout the state. People often ask why contraflow is not on the list. Contraflow is not considered because of the huge staffing needs required to control access to the interstates, as well as the needs to move staging and goods and supplies into the state. So emergency shoulder use is used instead. We also talked a little bit about traffic signal coordination in terms of some sort of phasing of traffic signals to kind of get those green times and get some platooning going on to help promote some evacuation flow. We looked at enhanced communications. As mentioned, people thought they did not have enough information or were uncertain about information, so having that enhanced communications. In this case, we looked at it primarily in 2 components. One as to whether there was additional signs provided, then also if the communications, the messages themselves were improved. And then I mentioned the hotspot locations that we looked at that as well in terms of if we could make some small intersection or interchange improvements, and then phased evacuations we also spoke about. So we used the statewide model to be able to evaluate 3 of the strategies, the emergency shoulder use, communications, and hotspot locations. This model develops the clearance times, or how long it would take to evacuate to shelters or to safe destinations. So for an evacuation level C, which corresponds to a category 3 hurricane, it's projected to take approximately 24 hours to evacuate to shelters in Hillsborough County. So we wanted to see if we made these 3 improvements, if there would be any changes in that. And it turns out that with the intersection improvements, making minor intersection improvements, it didn't have an influence on regional clearance times. But our transportation knowledge leads us to believe that it could potentially improve local needs. Many of these locations are where commercial areas are, and so would help people that are staying get supplies. Similarly, and this was a big surprise for us, that the emergency shoulder use did not result in an improvement in terms of clearance times. We talked with the modelers about this. The big reason primarily is because of the model assumes people will want to use the interstates to the extent they can, because they will be going longer distances. So it forces people to the interstate as a preference instead of staying on arterial roads. So as more capacity was added, that then was used up, and of course did not improve the clearance time. So that indicates that the interstates presumably are a bottleneck to being able to improve clearance times. What we did notice is that the evacuation rates through communications, if people did start evacuating earlier, instead of waiting 12 hours after notice and evacuating at 6 hours instead, which is how we tested this, we do see an enhanced or shortening of the clearance times. So then we also looked at the public opinion. Like I mentioned, we vetted these strategies with them. You can see what people felt in terms of whether they would use these or liked these strategies. Traffic signal coordination and phased evacuations ranked pretty high. People like traffic signal coordination because that was one they can understand, I think. The message signs and intersection changes were also, well received by about 2/3. The signs were less, some of the issues raised on signs was to make sure that they did not become debris themselves. So they need to be permanent signs to the extent feasible. And then for the intersection interchange improvements, enhancements, the thought was that they needed to be small and not cost very much. And then emergency shoulder use, there was a lot of concern in terms of how that actually functions in terms of debris and hitting interchanges and things like that. So when it came to recommendations, we had a series of recommendations for not just the TPO, but for other agencies as well. We did not find the silver bullet of how to improve emergency evacuations through one single strategy. So it'll probably take a series of strategies going forward to be able to support evacuation, and particularly as population continues to increase. So when it comes to roadway improvements, like I said, because of that interstate bottleneck type of issue, continuing to support a managed lanes or some sort of expansion, express lanes, could potentially be beneficial to evacuation and providing additional capacity. That's already on the books for the cost feasible plan, so we didn't, we're not suggesting anything different. Then also when it comes to the small interchange and intersection improvements, like I said, we think they can address local congestion. For transit and paratransit, there were a couple items that came up. HART in particular, and they could goes to a different service configuration during an emergency and gives preference to routes along the coast. And the thinking is that if it sticks to a fixed schedule, it would be able to pick up people that are traditionally used to using HART services or transit services and provide better convenience. Similarly, some registration programs to be able to identify people that would need assistance during an evacuation. I mentioned that deploying additional digital message signs, particularly in evacuation areas, and then also as throughout communications, kind of following the non-discrimination and equity plan in terms of those messages and dissemination. We found there was a lot of need for education in terms of people may or may not know they're in an evacuation zone. They didn't understand how emergency shoulder lanes works. So helping to support emergency management in those capabilities might be another way to assist. That is an emergency management function, so this would obviously be one where the TPO and its staff would be looking to provide some additional supplemental support. When it comes to equity considerations, we suggested developing congestion solutions in particular for what would be two areas where there are accessing shelters for areas of community of concern. So I mentioned the Fletcher Bruce B. Downs area, and then the area near Mango Road. Both of those are have communities of concern, either environmental justice or a large number of households with people with disabilities. And so, and they are on congested hotspots. So looking at those areas in particular would be important. And then we also want to talk about enhancing, I mentioned the transit, enhancing evacuation for people without vehicles, including for their ability to take pets with them, which, so maybe some shared services might be a way to do that. And then in terms of evacuation and sheltering, for emergency management, to consider phased evacuations at some point in time. This could be where visitors leave first, where you coordinate with McDill to have them try to leave a little bit earlier. And then another item that came up was that a lot of people evacuate when they do not need to evacuate. And they do that because of wind, and they're concerned about their structures that they're in, or that's our perception anyway. So we want to make a recommendation of investigating whether there are some housing strategies or programs such as weatherization or mitigation programs to identify and help mitigate those wind concerns. That was it in a nutshell. Yeah, I'm open to answer any question. Answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions?
I have a question.
All right, Bob, Brad, question.
On your survey, you had the Selman reversibles on there in blue, but it was not included as part of your survey response. Did you ask the question to the public, whether or not they would use that?
We did not ask that question. We figured that was something that was relatively well known to the public. But we do think there needs to be some education about the tolls, the lifting of tolls.
Next question I have is, so additional capacity in the system is not a strategy that we're looking at? Because I know for a fact that when we did the Selman West extension, hurricane evacuation was part of the analysis, and that knocked 20 minutes off the system as a whole on there. So I'm just curious to why. Are you identifying new corridors that are needed or areas that can be better served with additional capacity?
Like I said, we were trying to focus on strategies without addressing capacity. So that the information that you mentioned about the Selman West and being able to support regional evacuation makes a lot of sense, particularly for Pinellas. So, but that was not something that was looked at here.
Thank you.
Yes.
At the beginning, this is Brian Passaro from T-Bar. At the beginning of your presentation, you had a table that I think showed congested segments. Could you go back to that? These were all the segments that showed up as being congested during the Irma evacuation. Is that correct?
We looked at them through Irma, and then we also compared them with current congestion as well. So there's a kind of a composite between the two. But yes, they were congested during Irma.
Because what stood out to me on the freeway, so like nothing on 275 popped up, but you just showed 75.
I see what you're saying. We picked the top 10. So 275 was in there. We just picked the top 10.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? I equally find it interesting that the emergency lane use actually resulted in net non-savings. I mean, I'd have my concerns, especially thinking about an emergency vehicle's ability to access a problem if all of the emergency lanes are being used. I mean, I think that could be another potential problem, but I would have expected it unless there was a bottleneck on a bridge or something that would have not prevented access to continue, that it would have been better. But I'm like not an expert, so this is why we're on here to be enlightened about that stuff. So I don't really have a question, just more of a comment. Okay, but any other questions? With that, I guess we're looking for, you're looking, oh, do you have a question? Oh.
Yes. We're looking for an action item.
So we're looking for a motion. It's up on the board. So we can get a motion to accept the report.
Jonathan Scott, motion to approve the report.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Can we get a second?
Danny Jorgensen, second.
Thank you, Danny. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. Next up is Johnny with the Smart Cities Mobility Plan.
Hey everybody, just give me 1 sec to get the right screen brought up. I'm hoping that you all can see this. Johnny Wong, TPO. Okay, great, thanks. Johnny Wong, TPO staff. I'm here to present you with the final draft of the Smart Cities Mobility Plan. We've been working on this plan for quite a long time, more than a year, in fact. The reason why the TPO took this challenge on is because we've never had a Smart Cities plan before. We have had ITS plans in the past, and we based a lot of information from the previous 2013 ITS or Intelligent Transportation Systems Plan, and then advanced it into the Smart Cities Mobility Plan. But at 9 years old, the old ITS plan was really outdated, so we wanted to give it somewhat of a major overhaul. And we knew that we needed to change directions a little bit because there are so many smart cities or innovative technologies that are hitting the market. Some of them are already being worked into plans and being considered in design phases. We knew that we needed to have a more structured vision of how to deploy these technologies across the region. We also wanted this plan to be consistent with the goals of our 2045 LRTP, namely to plan for tech that can help manage infrastructure, improve safety, improve reliability, mobility, and of course, facilitate economic growth. The third goal of this plan was to develop a rough roadmap to guide those future developments. I already explained a little bit about the why, but another important point to note is that we want to make sure that as a TPO, we're supporting technology that not only us, but all the jurisdictions in this county agree is a valuable asset. There are so many technologies that are just hitting the market and they're really tough to evaluate. So we want to make sure that the ones we pay attention to and actually prioritize for funding are ones that we can all agree will have a benefit to us. And then goals 4 and 5 are really closely related. They pertain to educating the public about smart cities technologies. We want to make sure that we address any worries or misunderstandings that the public may have, because we really want to accelerate deployments where possible, and we don't want the public to be an obstacle to that. We want to work with them and make sure that if they have concerns, that we do our best to address them before it becomes a problem. And I'll explain a little bit about why we adopted that approach later on in the presentation. But first things first, we broke this plan down into 4 tasks, and the first was discovery and project inventory. This task was basically a lit review to see what small, medium, and large metro areas are doing in the way of smart cities and see what practices we can borrow from them. Because technology is like the most critical component to making a region smart, we categorized as many technologies as we could discover into an inventory and then color-coded each one according to which of our LRTP project categories would be impacted. The safety projects are orange, reliability is purple, mobility is blue, and then so on. Some of the tech that's enabling could have no impact on any of these investment categories. So we colored those gray. That doesn't mean that they're not beneficial. You might call some of these technologies enabling, like data collection, data integration, laying down fiber. Those can't be limited to just any single program category. So we made a choice to just color them gray and say, hey, these could have an effect on anything in the plan. The project team researched more than 100 smart cities plans and documents. We pulled out any technologies or strategies that we could identify and then created a profile of each one to determine whether or not the tech is existing, emergent, basically like what the status of its development and deployment is. We also identified which LRTP goal it would impact, how long it would take to deploy from the baseline, any strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, or threats, and then also made a note of anything else that was important or notable that was mentioned in the literature that we hadn't considered already. Once we had that information, we used it to produce a 15-page pamphlet describing the tech in plain language. This is where the public consumption comes into play and educating the public about what the tech is. There's no jargon in any of these fact sheets, very simple to understand. We explain what the tech is, what it's used for, and then note some successful examples of where it's being used. And even though the planning work is complete for this Smart Cities update, we can still utilize this template to inform the public about any upcoming projects, because we're not going to be updating this plan every year. It might be every 2 years, maybe even beyond that. The technology will undoubtedly change in that time period. So we're just going to keep these templates, and as things start to hit the market and get deployed, and we basically have case study info on it. We can continue churning these fact sheets out and distributing them. The second task of this plan was to establish a baseline so that we can see how we compare against other metros, both within the state and then across the nation, and some global examples as well. We really want to establish the baseline so that we can track our number of deployments over time and see whether we're having an impact on accelerating the use of technology in the region. To accomplish that, we really want to make a mapping tool. We haven't been able to complete that yet, so we don't have anything to show you at this particular moment. We collected GIS files from just about all the partner agencies within Hillsborough County, but we're still waiting on a couple, and one of them is a big agency. So, if we were to release it incomplete, there would be a noticeable gap in that data. So we're just going to hold off until we have a chance to collect it, and then we'll release it, distributing it to the agencies. So we'll work with the teams that helped us produce this plan. From what I can show you now, isn't a map, but it's a spreadsheet which I have copied onto this slide. So the deliverable that we have for this task currently is just this spreadsheet. Again, like I mentioned, it's all the tech that we introduced or all the tech that we identified in that inventory. We grouped them into about a dozen categories, which are shown on the left side of the slide. And then on the right, I clipped some tech from the spreadsheet, specifically ones that fell into the smart transportation category, which is obviously really broad, but the other categories are a little bit more narrow. So by process of elimination almost, anything that wasn't fitting into one of the other categories falls into smart transportation. The way that you can use this, and I'll caveat this with there are instructions in the plan, but the way you can use it, just for quick reference, is if the left column is colored, that means that we have the tech currently deployed somewhere in the region. But if it's not colored, or if it's colored on the right, we don't have it yet. There are other columns in the full version of this resource, again, available in the plan, but we basically group them do they exist and we have them? Does the tech exist but we don't have it? Or is the tech too emergent for us to have deployed? So there's 3 categories that could be filled in here. In the future, all the GIS files that we get, they'll be populated into a mapping tool, and whenever that's complete, again, we'll first roll it out to our agency partners and have them QA/QC it, and then when it's finally final, we will unveil it at an upcoming Smart Cities Alliance meeting. The third task was one of the most important for the TPO's work, because this task involved creating a new way to rank smart cities projects that are seeking funding. This is really important to us because our old prioritization criteria were not suited, or not well suited, I should say, to evaluate tech projects. That point was made very clear during last year's TIP update, because there was a project that was ranked in the TIP that we knew had a lot of value. It had huge benefits across the entire area, but it was ranked at the very bottom of the smart cities list because we weren't using the right criteria to evaluate it. So our goal for task 3 is to actually give valuable smart cities projects a fighting chance to receive some funds. To address this need, we created a new prioritization matrix, and it awards points based on whether the tech or the project achieves any LRTP goals. So any project can receive up to 5 points if it hits a number of LRTP goals. So if it's an infrastructure project that will also impact safety and reliability, it could get 3. If it's a project in key economic space, it could get 4. If there are mobility enhancements, it could get 5, right? So the best projects will automatically get 5 points right off the bat. We're also considering cost, how long it would take to deploy, whether the project can facilitate equity in a community of concern, if it has limitations or risks, the severity of the risk, and if benefit cost information is available, we can include that as a criterion as well, and then whether the project has a strategic value. I presented a draft of the matrix to our policy committee last November, and it was pretty well received. But following that discussion, we took the extra step of meeting with staff from all the jurisdictions and explaining to them how the scoring works. We provided some sample scores of their projects. So we looked at tech projects that they had submitted for funding in the past and then did the scoring with them in real time so they could kind of understand how we're evaluating. We received a couple general comments after those meetings were over, but none that required us to make modifications. So we feel that the matrix is pretty solid. It's so solid, in fact, that based on the reception we got from the policy committee, we feel very confident that the matrix will be adopted by the board when they receive this presentation in May. So we use the new scoring system to evaluate smart cities projects that we received during this year's TIP update. So once this plan is approved by the board in June, once the TIP is approved by the board in June, that new priority list will include 3 projects that were submitted to us by partner agencies just this year. Those 3 are listed at the bottom of this slide. Heart scheduling software is like an extension of the CAD ABL vehicle tracking, central.
Johnny, did we lose you?
I think you might be frozen, John. Yeah, we lost audio with you. So, yeah, either that or you're late and wait. One or the other. Yeah, you're moving, but we don't hear you.
I think he's talking about public stakeholder feedback.
So what he's saying, I'm going to read this.
This is when we need to have the interpreter. Underneath, scroll.
The closed
Closed caption.
It did. First is the matrix.
I wonder if I can hear it.
Johnny, we can't hear you.
Johnny, we can't hear you. Johnny? Johnny?
I can explain the whole concept of feedback now. I just learned that.
Well, I mean,
I was going to see if it's coming through here, like play it on. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
He just, he muted himself.
You know, or maybe he recorded this whole thing and he's playing it. All right, well, hear myself. Let's see.
Okay, so I don't know the rest of this slide deck, but he did get through most of it.
Yeah, I think so.
I think if we move to the recommendations, we might actually, or we can, type in questions.
Okay. So Johnny, can you hear me? I can see you on the screen. Can you hear me? Once for yes, twice for no.
Is the chat feature on? Like, is somebody trying chatting with
They,
them?
there's somebody just filled it out.
Yeah, Priya is our IT.
Lisa told him you may have to rejoin.
Johnny? Let me take the control and give it to you again. Let's see if it helps you with the voice. Audio. 1 minute, 1 second.
Welcome to the webinar. You have entered at Sunday in listen-only mode.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Actually, turn off your.
We can hear you on the phone, but not on the phone, computer. You're gone. Your voice is gone again. Can't hear you. No.
You need to do charades for the rest. I was going to guess charade, and it would be car driving.
Can you all hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, it's better now.
Okay. I don't know what happened. Sorry about that. I didn't touch anything. But anyway, how many slides did I go through where you didn't hear me?
Right here.
So one, I think we saw the slides up to methodology and results. I think we got a pretty good feel on it. So maybe restart on this slide.
Okay, sorry. So anyway, I was talking about public feedback. I don't know if you caught it, but while we were in the middle of pulling the research articles during the lit review, we noticed that there were a lot of case studies about technology being deployed and then problems being identified after the fact. Specifically, some that had an impact on equity, like in the DC area and many others. And at the time that we kicked off this plan, there were a lot of national conversations happening about the role of law enforcement. So we felt it was necessary for us to engage the public before wrapping this up. So in order to address the public engagement, we gave a presentation, 6 of them actually, to Tampa Bay Tech high school students during the Great American Teach-In. We created a survey and sent it home with the students, their parents, teachers from across the school. We promoted that survey online by our social media accounts. We also solicited feedback from the Tampa Bay Smart Cities Alliance, our ITS committee. We presented the plan to agency staff during an info barbecue, and then of course, like to engage the stakeholders, which we already planned to do, but as we were nearing the final phase of wrapping up the plan, we had one-on-one briefings with the agencies and asked them to review the plan and specifically that prioritization matrix. So after leaving the plan and the matrix in the hands of our agency partners for about a month, we ended up getting support, in fact, letters of support from Hillsborough County, Tampa, Temple Terrace, DOT, and THEA. One thing I'll say about the survey is that it was far from representative. We only got about 70 responses, but we did our best considering we weren't originally intending on doing any public feedback whatsoever. We did feel that it's enough for us to flag some technologies as in need of further research. So we're not going to say that the results of the survey are enough to decide the appropriate course of action about whether or not to deploy certain technologies, but our hope for translating the responses into action is for agencies to take a pause and consider that some segments of the public might be less comfortable with certain technologies than others. Just as an example, on the survey, some technologies that got almost unanimous support were tech like light sensors or smart lighting, flood sensors, transit apps, navigation apps. Those received almost no negative responses, but things like facial recognition software, payment apps, any tech that implicates law enforcement like red light running cameras and first responder drones, those generated very strong responses, both positive and negative. So it's enough for us to take some time and make sure that we're engaging skeptical segments of the community before we embark on any of these kind of projects. That pretty much wraps it up. We have some plan recommendations and I'm going to read them off to you real quick. This Smart Cities plan has a vision statement and it's intended to guide deployments in the future, so bear that in mind. The recommendations are for us to intelligently deploy the latest smart cities tech to allow for monitoring, assessment, and management of the transportation network, to translate performance insights into action and provide safe, efficient, convenient, and equitable transportation options across the county, to plan for deployment of the highest ranking projects identified in the gap analysis in the prioritization matrix, to use the prioritization matrix to appropriately score smart cities projects in the TIP, to seek new funding sources for smart cities, for the Smart Cities program and to accelerate deployments, and then to utilize those smart cities fact sheets to engage and inform the general public about the benefits of the tech. This is an action item, and we're proposing that the committee approve the report and then forward it to the TPO board for consideration. And this is my contact info. I'll open it up for questions and discussion if you have any.
Okay, very good. Is there any questions for Johnny? I know it's. Anyone online? I know this was, obviously you guys were thorough. I know we talked about it in the ITS committee sessions past, so it's I think personally, it's certainly a positive step, and especially to develop in the matrix to make it a little bit more uniform and how things are evaluated is a good thing. There's a lot of technology out there that can be helpful, but sometimes it can infringe on things, and that's one of the things I think is good to kind of have that assessment as part of the evaluation. So is there any other comments or questions? Nicole Sutton, yes.
Yeah, so I want to just weigh in on what Johnny talked about with, that there is some reluctance around the red light running cameras, and then of course the facial recognition and how that fits into kind of this greater dialogue that we're having about systemic racism and the impact, right, equitable impact on this type of technology, and also considering that often it is non-violent offenses or traffic infractions that will be the entry level for somebody into, the criminal justice system. And so I just really appreciate the acknowledgement of that, and to be able to commit to spending more time on exploring what that could mean in our county.
Thank you. I was very passionate about that specifically, and we had some really great conversations with high schoolers of all people, like folks that probably don't have too much experience dealing with law enforcement, let's say, but they had really great insights on the role of red light running cameras. I was shocked because we presented this really esoteric technology, and after just explaining it to them in a few sentences, a lot of them formed opinions and were more than willing to share. So that great American teaching was very rewarding.
I just wanted to jump in, Johnny, from a viewpoint of Vision Zero and safety. So I'm sure you said it, that it's not just throwing that idea away, but maybe making it better, because we have learned across the country that the light running cameras and speed cameras have been effective, at least for repeat offenders to, not recur or occur. So there's a way to do the fines that it's, $20. I don't know, there might be different ways to do it. So I just don't want to say that that's, eliminating those options, but I definitely am sensitive to what you said, Nicole.
Yeah, definitely. You got that right, Gina. So we didn't feel strongly enough about the feedback we received on any technology to exclude them from the list. What we came up with is one prioritization criteria, which doesn't account for any points. So it doesn't figure into the weighting scale, but we do know if there are any risks or limitations or potential opposition to the technologies. If there is, we flag them and we'll make a recommendation to agencies to consider them. What we don't want to assume is that one technology can solve the problem in all circumstances, right? Like what works for one community might not work in another. So we don't want red light running cameras, for example, to be treated like a panacea. They might not be appropriate in every community.
Do we have any other comments? All right, hearing none, I guess we will now look for a motion to approve the Smart Facilities Mobility Plan and forward to the board. Can I get a motion?
This is Jay Collins. I'll make a motion to approve and forward to the board the Smart Cities Mobility Plan update.
Okay, can we get a second? Danny Jorgensen with the second. All right, all in favor, say aye. You vote. All right, sounds good. Thank you, Johnny.
All right, thank you all.
All right, next up is the certification, the planning process.
Good afternoon. This is Beth Alden again with the TPO, the Executive Director. We are bringing forward our annual review of our Metropolitan Transportation Planning process. MPOs in general are funded largely through federal grants from Metropolitan Transportation Planning, and the federal government does set a lot of standards and requirements on what they wish that Metropolitan Transportation Planning process to look like, including that it is cooperative, continuing, and comprehensive, and addresses quite a number of factors and engages the public in setting priorities. So every 4 years, we do an extensive desk audit with Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration representatives. In between those reviews, we conduct an annual kind of a check-in with our DOT District 7 staff. So typically they'll provide us a questionnaire to check any items that have been flagged in the past that we want to make sure are getting handled, or anything new that's come up, you know, say new requirements that have come up through the state planning process or through coordination between the feds and the state. So this year, we're just doing one of those kind of abbreviated annual reviews. And so you have a summary in your agenda packets of the findings of that review. There were no corrective actions identified. There were a number of notable achievements. So in particular, the non-discrimination plan, the Safe Routes to Parks pilot study, which is kind of a new study for us, the storm evacuation forecast study that you just saw, and that was specifically designed to look at operational improvements, land use changes, behavior changes, because major capacity improvements are looked at in the context of the DOT strategic intermodal system studies and plans. So we were looking at things that would complement the strategic intermodal system plan. But getting back to some of the other projects, the low-cost air quality monitoring pilot project that we got a special state innovation grant for last year, and then the collaborative work with the Planning Commission and HART on the transit-oriented development study. There were a couple of recommendations as we move forward. One is there is some statewide review of the procurement processes of all of the MPOs around the state, looking at our points awarded for planning consultant firms who have disadvantaged business enterprises on their teams, and our points awarded for being in a particular geographic location. Because under the federal rules, it shouldn't matter what your location is. The feds are not going to give preference for one physical location over another in the United States. And so they would not want federal funds to be used to give preference to firms in particular geographic locations. So we have provided some more detailed information about how our last procurement was conducted. We did not give points for disadvantaged business enterprises. It was a point of information, but it wasn't one of the scoring criteria. And the locational question was asked about availability as well as physical location. So, I mean, do you have staff who is available to work on these projects wherever they are? So we have not heard back yet from District 7 over whether that adequately answers the questions. If not, we will be redoing our procurement process. But as I said, we're not the only ones in this boat. This is all of the MPOs in the state that are being looked at. And then a couple other comments about working with our board and committees about the amount of time that we spend sometimes on our agenda items and making sure that we get through all of the business that needs to be handled and that the board and committee members understand what the TPO's role is. So that's kind of a typical recommendation we would expect to see and certainly something we're going to be continuing to work on. So I'd be happy to take any questions about this year's review and would look forward to your recommendation to the board to have the chair sign the annual certification statement.
All right, thank you, Beth. Do we have any comments or discussion?
Jeff, I got
Yes, but
Hey, Beth, I got two quick questions for you. One of them is probably pretty easy. What does it take to fail this review? Because it seems like, you know, we're doing everything right. Are there other counties or other arenas that are not doing a good job?
Sure. There's a code of federal regulations that lays out what is absolutely required. And then there are best practices, which are, kind of the nice to haves. So how do you fail a review? You fail a review by not doing everything that's specified in the code of federal regulations. We've never had a corrective, no, not as long as I've been here, 20 years. We have not had a corrective action. Pasco MPO has. They were not preparing an evaluation of their public participation program. This is probably a decade ago now, and that is something that's required. So when we come to you and we say, this is required under federal regulations, one of the things we mean is if we don't produce something here, we're not going to be in compliance, and it's going to be a problem in our next review.
Gotcha. And then the second question is, what is the plan on the meeting times? Because I've heard that a lot, that meetings just keep going. What's the game plan to get that back on track?
Well, the TAC hasn't really had as many problems in that arena. There are a couple of other committees that have been running long for quite a while. And so
generally.
Yeah, so we're talking with the chairs of those committees about how to manage the conversation. How do we provide opportunities to give their input and be heard, but like not spend 10 minutes, for example, sharing their opinion. Try to get to the point, raise the concern, and then figure out how it can be addressed. Another thing, that second recommendation, the third recommendation, the recommendation right after that is kind of related. It's helping the committee members understand what it is the TPO can do. What are the levers that the TPO as an organization can pull? Because there's a lot of things that citizens would like to have, but it isn't necessarily something that the TPO can do. And so we could spend a lot of time on all of the wishes that everybody has, but is that a good use of the organization's time if there isn't very much that we can do about it? So we definitely acknowledge that that's something that we are going to be continuing to pay attention to and continuing to provide information to our committee members and our board members about, where can the TPO help them and be the most useful, and then, where might we end up spinning our wheels?
All right, very good. Good questions too. Anyone else? Comments? Well, I know I've been involved for several years now. I'm from an outside agency, but I definitely have always been complimentary, because it really seems like you guys, Beth and on down, are very cognizant of what you have to do and, get those things done. So certainly not surprised that they would evaluate you and be recertified, but you still have to go through the process. So I personally would absolutely support recertification, but I can't make the motion. So at this point, I will ask for committee member to make the motion to support the recertification and forward for signature.
It's Brian Pissar from T-Bar. I'll make a motion that we accept the annual certification for the board.
All right, thank you, Brian. Can I get a second?
Second, Mark Hudson.
Mark, thank you for the second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you to my team who does a lot of great work.
Okay, next up is a non-action item. Status report for the City of Tampa moves in Vision Zero.
Okay, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, I'm Alana Brazier. I'm the Vision Zero coordinator for the City of Tampa. And I'm going to give you an overview as condensed as possible of two really major initiatives that we've been leading with the transportation department or mobility department. So I'm going to turn my camera off just in case technical issues and share my screen. All right, so you guys are seeing the presentation, right?
Almost. We see a blue screen right now.
Okay, hold on. There we go. Got it?
That's good.
All right, so we have been working very hard the past couple of years in the mobility department on two big initiatives. One is Tampa Moves, which is our citywide mobility plan, and the other is Vision Zero, and they're both interrelated. I'll get into that in a minute. So just to give you a little bit of background before I dive into things, when Mayor Castor took office back in 2019, she had what we called a Transforming Tampa's Tomorrow. So it was this strategic planning initiative that brought together a whole bunch of citywide stakeholders and focused on these 5 topics: sustainability and resilience, housing affordability, workforce development, development services, and then transportation. And that transportation team came up with a set of strategies that needed to be done to start moving towards a new vision for Tampa. And you can see the top 5 overarching strategies here: implementing strategic transit projects, focusing on trails and greenways, adopting Vision Zero, reinventing urban parking, and enhancing neighborhood engagement. And another one that's not here, it was kind of a global recommendation, was to develop a citywide mobility plan, which up until that point had not really been done to the level that we are doing currently. So just wanted to give you some background on where these two efforts have come from. So Tampa Moves is our citywide mobility plan. This is a longer term plan looking 30 years into the future to identify our needs and identify a data-driven prioritization process for how we fill those needs and how we use our funding so that it's tying back to the community's vision and our citywide vision. And also part of this, we are setting some standards and priorities for different types of modes. So identifying a low stress bike network, transit emphasis corridors, walk network, and then those roads that are primary for vehicular travel. We have, at the outset of this, we have identified our guiding principles, which make up the letters of moves. So we have mobility for all, opportunity, connecting people to jobs, vision, which is really encompasses a healthy community, sustainability and resilience, equity, and then safety, which is the Vision Zero component. So with these guiding principles, it's really helping us organize how we prioritize projects going forward. And we've been working with our consultant Kittleson and Associates. This is just a really quick example of what we plan to do going forward. So this was an initial test of that prioritization process. So you can see we have the guiding principles on the left, and then various evaluation criteria to see how well these sidewalk gaps were meeting those criteria. So you can see on the map, the blue areas are lower priority, and then the red lines are the higher priority. So those red lines, they achieved more of these criteria, whether they were closer to transit and schools, located within a community of concern, or on a Vision Zero corridor. So those red areas are those sidewalk gaps that we know we really need to focus our resources on first, based on all of those different evaluation criteria. So we plan to do this for all of our projects going forward. And this is a very, very quick overview of what we've been working on with moves. There are a whole lot of other aspects to this, and I'd be happy to come present to you guys at another date on more of those pieces, but I know we're pressed for time, so I wanted to get into more of the Vision Zero piece of this. So while Tampa Moves is kind of our overarching umbrella of how we plan to do things going forward, the S is that Vision Zero piece. So that's really a significant part of this effort. And it's really focused on eliminating roadway fatalities and serious injuries, more rapidly deploying safety treatments, and just really getting unified under the goal of 0 deaths and serious injuries. We know through a crash analysis that we did, we have on average 44 people who die and another 289 who suffer life-altering injuries on our roads in Tampa each year. So that's a very high number, and unfortunately last year was even worse than normal, and this was a nationwide scenario that was seen that played out, but it was even more amplified in Tampa, where we saw almost double our average. Last year we had 81 fatalities across the city of Tampa, so nearly double. I think nationwide it was about 20% increase than the average. So it's a big issue, but I just want to kind of frame that up for you, really why we're focusing in on this. And so I'm sure by now you've heard and know the definition of Vision Zero, but it's setting this goal to eliminate fatalities and severe injuries on our roads. And it's based on the premise that no loss of life on our roads is acceptable, and we need to design our roadways to be more forgiving. We have overall this 12 steps to recovery, the road to zero. So we're about halfway of all of these steps that we've identified. So we've had our city leadership support it with city council and the mayor supporting it. We've joined the Vision Zero network, which joins us with other Vision Zero cities across the country and the world. Hired a Vision Zero coordinator, so someone who is focused on this effort. We've formed our Vision Zero Coalition and developed our Vision Zero Action Plan, and we've had our Vision Zero pledge signing with our mayor and other key stakeholders. So now we have a lot more work to do, but I want to give you kind of the highlights of our action plan and what we do plan to do, because that's really a big piece of any Vision Zero effort, is identifying that plan going forward. So over the course of 2021, we had a group of stakeholders meet over the course of a few months and identified the strategies and action items that make up this action plan. So it's really focused on the shorter term, like what can we start doing in the next 5 years to start doing things differently, and identifying metrics so we can track and monitor our progress and provide that transparency and accountability to what we're doing. So we had a task force that met a total of 9 times in 2021, and we had 3 committees. We had a city policy and program committee, so that was really focused on those policies and internal workings that we needed to realign to support this Vision Zero effort. We had a crash analysis and countermeasures committee that was really made up of a lot of our engineers, our agency partners, and then our law enforcement partners as well. So bringing those 2 pieces together, engineering and enforcement, into one committee. And then the third one was our equity and engagement committee. So making sure that we're making the public aware, including them in this process, and making sure equity is at the forefront of everything. And just to share one critical piece of our crash analysis, I have a whole lot of statistics that I could share if anyone's interested, but as part of our action plan, we identified what we call our high injury network. And this is where we have a very large number of fatalities and severe injuries. So these corridors, they're broken down by roads that we, the city of Tampa, own and maintain, roads that the county owns and maintains, and the DOT owned roads. So as a whole, they represent 24% of road miles within the city of Tampa, but they represent 73% of fatalities that happen. So as you can see, if we really start to prioritize our investments on these critical corridors, we can really start to make some big changes in safety. Another critical piece of our action plan is the actual strategies and action items that we identified. So we followed the FHWA approach of the SAFE system, which organizes this effort under safer streets, safer speeds, safer people, safer vehicles, safety data, and post-crash care. So I just want to give you the really high level, quick overview of what some of these action items are. So under safer streets, we want to design self-enforcing streets that guide appropriate behavior. So focusing in on that high injury network, prioritizing those corridors and focusing our resources there. We also are working on developing a Vision Zero quick build program, which is something that we've seen other Vision Zero cities do with success. So these are more of the lower cost, quicker to implement projects that just include paint and other treatments. So it's not these really costly capital projects, but deploying treatments as quickly as possible, just using these lower cost semi-permanent treatments. So that's just a couple efforts under that category. We also have our safer speeds element. And one of the things that we plan to do with that, and we're already developing right now, is updating and refreshing our neighborhood traffic management program to be a little more proactive rather than a reactive program. So we're in the process of getting that going, that refresh happening. Also working towards updating and creating a street design guidelines that are based on context classifications and looking at the surrounding land use. So there's more to come with that. Under the safer people element, we are working to just engage with the community more in a broad basis. So whether we have more open streets events or different paint projects like the artistic bulb outs or intersection murals that you've seen, we want to do more of that. And then also thanks to the TPO for helping fund a school safety study for us. That's going to be a really big element for us. So it's looking at some of the schools that need safety treatments prioritized, but it also includes an element of working with the schools and the school district to encourage greater walking and biking participation. So it's going to be a great effort, and that just kicked off last week. Under safer vehicles, we are planning to use our city fleet as mobile billboards. We also want to make sure our drivers are behaving as safely as possible. We are also expanding our micromobility program to be citywide. So I think later this year it will expand citywide, not just with stand-up scooters, but sit-down scooters and e-bikes. And then of course we want to support transit in those first and last mile connections. On the safety data and post-crash care element, we are continuing to collaborate with first responders, in particular TPD. They've been a really great resource for us because they're the ones that are out there reporting to the crashes, and they've been alerting us when they start to see crash hotspots coming up. And one in particular that we saw last year was the intersection of Boy Scout and Manhattan. And we are now working towards getting a signal at that intersection because we saw 2 fatal crashes at that same location, and that we really first found out about it from our TPD partners. They alerted us to that. So we're also developing a public facing crash dashboard that you can access on our city website, and then we'll report annually on our progress. And then a last piece that I added in, but that I think is critical, is this implementation success piece. So continuing to have those Vision Zero coalition meetings, continuing to collaborate with our peer community, and continuing to seek funding for projects and programs. And then last slide, just want to let you guys know about a few upcoming events that we have. We, as part of our Tampa Moves effort, we have 4 corridor charrettes that are coming up. So we have a kickoff meeting that is April 26th. It'll be in the evening, and we have a special guest, Dan Burden, who is the nationwide walkability expert. So he'll be here for a couple days, and he's actually going to go out to each of these 4 corridors, do a walk audit, and then at that April 26th meeting, he'll be presenting his findings. We're going to really try to make it a worthwhile event and a very interactive and fun event for you to come to. The 4 corridors that we're looking at are Main Street from MacDill to North Boulevard. So building off of the neighborhood commercial district work that has been done previously. We're looking at Habana Avenue. This is one of the Vision Zero high injury network corridors that is city owned. This is right by St. Joseph's Hospital. We are also having a charrette on Twig Street. So this is in downtown from Ashley Drive to Nebraska. And then MacDill Avenue from Bay to Bay to Kennedy. And this is one where we know we have an upcoming water project. It's also a corridor that we think it could be potentially good for lane repurposing. So that'll be a great one. That'll be mid-June. So mark your calendars. We'll be sure to send you guys updates as more details come out. And we also have our website, tpamoves.org. This is our engagement platform that we've been using for these efforts. So we are keeping it up to date, and feel free to take a look around there. And then if you need my email, feel free to reach out to me here. And that's all I have for today. Sorry if I went over a little bit. It's hard to pare it down.
Oh, that's okay, no problem, Alana. I just have a general question. That's probably been one that's asked quite a bit, but when you talked about nearly double the deaths last year, and it was a national trend, from my understanding, but like, what did you find locally for the city that was reflective of that? And how did you maybe target any potential fixes for the future years?
Well, it's still, all the crash data is still pretty fresh. And, we're only 3 months into the new year. So we haven't necessarily done a thorough analysis, but at least at first glance, it looks like, and this fits with the national trend too, it's just more aggressive behavior as a whole. So more aggressive driving, more speeding. We're seeing people are just feeling like they can take more risks for some reason. And that's not just showing up in crash data, but it's showing up in other data as well. So like violent crimes have been up apparently, and then alcohol and drug related crimes as well. So I think there's been some articles that are kind of guessing to what's happening, but I think it's just generally people are feeling riskier coming out of the pandemic and willing to take more risks while on the road.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think all of that makes sense. I'm curious, and this isn't an answer you would have now, but I mean, part of me is curious too, if, there's many more people working outside of the norm, and whether, because in my observation as simply a citizen for the most part, traffic is a lot more busy on times of the day it never used to be pre-pandemic. So I'm curious if, like, a look at the data shows, like, on the timing of some accidents, if they're happening, where they used to be predominantly rush hour, beginning and end, now they're maybe trending across the whole day, whether that's a potential, that in combination with the influx of people moving here, that's, we are certainly in an area where the growth exceeds. There's a lot of things I can explain. And I know you don't have an answer for that now. I'm just curious as it goes along, and you do get that if you're back at a future meeting, if that kind of topic can be talked about.
Yeah, very valid point.
Research when we were looking at our safety targets, and it was very true. There was not a year, maybe 1 year that had in the history, one time hour of the day that had less than 25 serious crashes in that hour, and there was no times during the last pandemic. There was actually like 7 times, whatever. I can't obviously remember exactly, but there was way more crashes throughout the day, serious crashes. Yeah, people are driving whenever they want to when they're working from home.
Right. I would not. Let me just say that wouldn't surprise me. And as it goes along and the data's out there, and maybe it's something part of the planning prospects is find ways to work around it. That's what you guys do. But it's interesting study. So is there any other questions for Alana? Okay, I don't think so. We will move on. Thank you very much, and you were very very thorough with the presentation and so forth. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, next up is it's the IIJA grant opportunities.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Amber Simmons, and I am here to give you some information on the grant opportunities and hopefully initiate a discussion about what agencies might be applying for and which grants to look for opportunities to create stronger applications through collaboration.
Amber, we can see your notes. I didn't know if you wanted to just put it in presentation.
Oh. How's that? I'm not sure. That's good?
Yep.
Okay. Let me just switch these around. There we go. Thank you, Gina. Okay. There we go. And so in the interest of time too, I will kind of cruise through the background of this so we can get right to some of the opportunities. But overall, it's been nicknamed Bill for the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It has 3 funding types. There's the Highway Trust Fund, which it is contract authority over 5 years, and it does act as real money that is available to spend. The second piece is guaranteed appropriations, which either increases funding for existing programs or will create new programs. The third is the general fund, which has been authorized to be spent, but will require future actions by appropriations committees to make it actually available to spend. Out of the $274.1 billion in new spending, about 90 of it is in contract authority through reauthorization, and 184 billion is in new spending in guaranteed appropriations. So why it's important for us to have the discussion, and as I'm sure you're already aware, many federal discretionary grants are highly competitive. There are many noble and good projects, and the federal government is generally looking for the most bang for the buck, so to speak. And that generally means partnerships, having benefit for the most people over the widest area possible. So to make any application stronger, if there's a grant opportunity we review here that your agency is considering, it benefits everyone. If we have that discussion and we're aware of it in advance, there may even be some potential for collaboration that would make a stronger overall application. It's almost always beneficial to demonstrate the collaboration between agencies and regions when it comes to most grant applications. Things to keep in mind about the IIJA funds is the formula funds may be impacted by population estimates. There may be some reduced capacity at the federal level, which may take longer to get applications out and to send out awards. And there could be some concerns with the competitive grants about how equitable the funds would be awarded to traditionally underserved communities. So again, collaboration applications almost always have an advantage over that. This just gives you an overview of the expected funding over the 5-year period. And I'll jump right into some of the programs. These are the new formula programs. There's a carbon reduction program to reduce transportation emissions. That's $6.4 billion over 5 years that will be allocated to each state. Those states will sub-allocate 65% of those funds based on population, and it requires obligation authority to be made available for spending those funds. The eligibility, the funds can be used for any of the surface transportation block grant programs that you may also know as SU funds, and those eligible use if a state can show a reduction in transportation emissions. And states in consultation with MPOs must develop a carbon reduction strategy within 2 years. The next one that you're looking at is promoting resilient operations for transformative, efficient, and cost savings transportation. That is a formula with some competitive grant component over the next 4 years. It's $7.3 billion with 1.4 in competitive grants over the 5 years. The MPOs are eligible for resilience planning grants, where the federal share is 100%, and 80% share from the federal side is resilience improvement grants, community resilience and evacuation route grants, and at-risk coastal infrastructure grants. Eligible projects will include the use of natural infrastructure or construction or modification of storm surge, flood protection, aquatic ecosystem restoration, related to highway projects, public transportation, interrail facilities, or port facilities. And the National Infrastructure Project Assistance Grants. This was just released. They're known as the Infra, Mega, and Rural Grants. Their due dates are May 23rd of 22. We do have an understanding from a previous meeting that DOT may be pursuing an infra grant for truck parking off of I-4 and County Line Road. And I believe maybe looking into one of the mega grants, not this round, but for the next round for possible rail projects. The evaluation criteria on these are larger projects. To the extent the project supports achieving a state of good repair, the level of benefits that the project is expected to generate, including avoided costs due to closures or reduction of asset use, reductions in maintenance costs, safety benefits, improved person or freight throughput, and environmental and health benefits. Has a good cost benefit ratio, number of persons or volume of freight supported by the project, and a national and regional economic benefit to the project. Some of the other considerations for this is how the project contribute to geographical diversity and balance between urban and rural communities, a multi-state benefit, and the extent to which the project uses materials or approaches that reduce greenhouse gases or reduce the need for maintenance of other projects and technologies that will allow for future connectivity and automation, and whether the project will benefit historically disadvantaged communities or population or area of persistent poverty, and if the project benefits multiple modes of transportation and improves the connectivity between the transportation. So under the active transportation infrastructure, this goes into the competitive grant category. This grant is on our watch list, and it emphasizes plans that create active transportation networks connecting destinations within or between communities, including schools, workplaces, residences, businesses, recreation areas, or creates an active transportation spine connecting 2 or more communities, metropolitan regions, or states, and to integrate active transportation facilities with transit and where available to improve access to public transportation. 30% of those funds must go to projects that connect networks and public transportation to businesses, schools, et cetera, and 30% must go to the construction of active transportation spine. $3 million a year will be set aside for planning and design grants. There. The Safe Streets and Roads for All is one that we also intend to apply and is on our watch list. It emphasizes projects that may include developing a comprehensive safety action plan, or Vision Zero, which exists, to conduct planning, design, and development activities for projects and strategies that are identified in that plan, and to carry out the projects and strategies identified in the safety action plan. The TPO has started coordinating with the City of Tampa, DOT, and county staff about the application, although the notice of funding has not yet officially been released. In the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program, 25% of this shall be used for contracts to carry out a highway rail grade crossing safety information and education program that will, one, help prevent and reduce pedestrian, motor vehicle, and other accidents, incidents, injuries, and fatalities, and two, to improve the awareness along railroad rights-of-way and the highway rail grade crossings. Amtrak will also be receiving a portion of these funds. These are larger grants and will be an opportunity for partnerships, we believe. And the Reconnecting Communities pilot program, the TPO is also quite interested in applying for this program, as there are projects listed on our upcoming UPWP that are contingent upon finding additional funding. This is a pilot program for communities that are economically disadvantaged that will receive priority consideration for this. Planning feasibility studies, according to Bill, considers the feasibility of removing, retrofitting, or mitigating existing eligible facilities to restore community connectivity. That includes the evaluations of current traffic patterns, the capacity of the existing network to maintain mobility needs, analysis of alternate roadway design or other uses of right-of-way, and multiple other planning projects that address the connecting of communities that were impacted by existing transportation facilities. And it also includes the construction of implementing some of these projects. The Transportation Access Pilot Program. This establishes a pilot program to develop or procure an accessibility data set and make it available to each eligible entity of the program and improve transportation planning of those eligible entities, which what it will do is by measuring the level of access by surface transportation modes to important destinations, such as jobs, healthcare, childcare, educational, workforce training facilities, housing, food sources, and points within the supply chain for freight commodities, and the connections between surface transportation modes. Secondly, looking at the level of access by surface transportation modes by a variety of population categories, whether it be low income, minority, age, disability, geographical location, and freight has a different subset of qualifiers. And another piece that we wanted to talk about too is community project funding, or what was formerly called earmarks. It is defined as any congressionally directed spending, tax benefit, or tariff that benefits a specific entity, state, locality, or congressional district. Since the funding is specified to a recipient, it is by nature not subject to the competitive award process. Its potentially eligible projects range from infrastructure, community programs, university research, hospitals, and local initiatives. House lawmakers have broadly outlined plans to use earmarks in the upcoming bill. And it's really important to communicate the intent if we intend to request an earmark, because the TPO frequently gets asked about the relative priority of projects. And if we don't know about the request, it's harder for us to help the agency and know what's happening. This slide in particular just gives you some of the key takeaways of what earmarks are, and there are some of the pieces of information that are important to know. There is a funding cap that's limited to 1% of discretionary spending, and the projects are for the fiscal year and cannot include multi-year funding. So they pretty much need to be shovel ready. Planning projects may be requested. There is a limit on the number of requests. Last year it was 10, this year is 15. There is a ban on for-profit recipients. Funding may only be for nonprofits or a specific state, locality, or congressional district. There must be 3 key elements to the project description. The basic description, budget breakout, specifically describing how funds will be used by the grantee, and the explanation of why it's a good use for taxpayer funds. And there may be no financial interest. Members must certify that they, their spouse, or immediate family members do not have any interest in the requested projects. There is a transparency component that the requests are submitted online, must be searchable. New this year is there's a 15-day wait period between the submission and posting online. And the reasoning behind this is to allow the committee to review and ensure that it's submitted to the correct category. And I'd like to thank you for your time and kind of open up the discussion to regional coordination. It's strongly encouraged by the USDOT. So if we're looking to apply for the same grant and we don't coordinate, it could have a negative impact. So thank you.
Good, thank you. Amber, do we have any comments or questions?
I just wanted to let my colleagues know that we are going to be helping organize the Safe Roads and Streets for All grants that we might submit, and we have some ideas that come from the city, come from the county, and some of DOT that are, or even talked about like on the high entry network. So I'll be coordinating that with you guys.
Very good. It certainly seems like there's a lot of opportunities there. So I'm glad to see that TPO is looking for considering that. And definitely my limited experience with grants is that when you can partner, they generally get more credibility. So that would be encouraging. Any other comments or discussion? Okay, thank you, Amber. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And if I do have a summary sheet, if you'd like, or you can always email me if your agency has intent to apply for any of these, that would be spectacular.
Good, thank you. All right. Next up is the UPWP draft, also here.
Yes. Okay. And you can see the Unified Planning Work Program?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So again, I'm Amber Simmons, and I'm happy to present to you the preliminary draft of our fiscal year 23-24 UPWP and TPO recommended projects. Just as a quick reminder, the UPWP is updated every 2 years, and the TPO fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. The UPWP purpose is to document and coordinate federal and state funding for MPO transportation planning that's conducted by the TPO, DOT, HART, and CTD. It also outlines our major planning tasks and complies with our federal and state rules. This year, the PL and FTA funds are combined and treated as if they're all PL funds, and it does not yet include the deobligated funds or CTD, Commission for Transportation Disadvantaged State funds. The Commission for Transportation Disadvantaged State Funds were estimated at previous year amounts of $50,336, as those amounts aren't yet known. In comparison to fiscal year 22, there's approximately $464,000 more in combined PL and FTA funds and approximately $300,000 more in SU funds. Listed here are the 6 tasks that you are familiar with and some of the areas within each, as well as a new task 7, which you may see, which is a regional task. Unlike our previous regional task 6, the new SCTPA support and shared task has been in development as part of a regional project to make the UPWP task tables more uniform and to clearly define the task or tasks where a transfer of funds between MPOs take place. The only listed items in the new regional task are items that both transfer funds between MPOs and require an MPO MOU or agreement to do so. Other coordinated efforts remain in task 6. So the next few slides summarize the fiscal years 21 and 22 completed projects. Task 6 focuses on our system and corridor planning and related studies and projects. Task 3 focuses on data monitoring, long-range transportation plan. And Task 4 focuses on transportation improvement program. Our task 5 is our public participation. And lastly, the task 6 were the regional coordination projects that were completed in the fiscal years 21 and 22. We are also pleased to report that our current disadvantaged business enterprise, or DBE as it's commonly referred to, is at 14.5% of consultant projects. The state goal is 10.65. This slide gives you an overview of the UPWP development schedule. The first preliminary draft was sent to DOT on March 15th. This committee, as well as others, are commenting on the preliminary drafts in April, and the final UPWP approval will by the TAC, CAC, and the board will be in May. The new fiscal year UPWP will become effective on July 1st, 2022. And next we give you our list of this year's partner agency requests for planning and analysis. From HART, we had the transit development plan that we're offering a 50-50 match to assist HART with this study. The city of Tampa had Vision Zero requests for citywide streetlight evaluation and signal timing program, and corridor studies and roadway safety assessments for multiple corridors, and the streetcar feasibility study phase 4. Here is our TPO recommended projects list. The next few slides demonstrate or highlight the TPO recommended projects list and summarizes the critical path projects that began in fiscal year 22 and will continue in 23, and optional recommended projects that are recommended with additional alternative funding. The critical path projects are listed first. These are either previously approved or will commence in 2023 or are needed as part of maintaining compliance with federal and state rules. These are the critical path projects continued. The total estimated costs of all critical path projects are about $1.2 million. Other recommended projects lists have an estimated cost of $1 million. Those include Plant City Southeast Master Plan, supporting or other planning, Temple Terrace Multimodal District Update or other planning, the completion of the HART bus stop inventory, support for HART transit development plan, road safety assessments for county roads in the city of Tampa, resiliency return on investment evaluations for projects, the Metropolitan priorities for state rail plan, and additional data collection, which will include multimodal counts, health data. This next slide shows you the other recommended projects that are contingent upon funding. We have also suggested some of the funding sources that could be considered. We would look at expanding the air quality monitoring project for I-275, I-4 corridors that are contingent upon a successful EPA grant application, an I-275 conversion study, phase 1, that's contingent upon the Reconnecting Communities pilot program that we spoke of earlier, streetcar feasibility study, which is contingent upon transportation sales surtax possibly, and the intercity rail planning, also contingent upon FRA corridor identification development program in collaboration with some other partners. The projects that you see here are fiscal year 22 projects that are in progress and will conclude in 23. And as this is a coordinated planning process, the intent of the UPWP is to assist with documenting the coordination. The next 2 slides look at FDOT and HART's federally funded planning projects. FDOT has submitted their planning activities, and they are listed within the UPWP as Appendix G. The HART planning information is forthcoming and will be listed in Appendix H in the new UPWP. Are there any questions?
Any questions? There it is. Regarding the UPWP program.
A lot of projects
I know there's a whole lot going on there.
that we've done and others that we're doing.
Yeah, I definitely saw some interesting ones in there, but I'm not going to ask for details at this time, but just curious to see how they'll keep moving along and the results down the line. Did I hear someone online?
Yeah, I've got a quick question. Does UPWP require us to identify funding or for the priorities?
It doesn't. So we use the SU funds and the DPL and FTA funding for that. How that gets divided is it usually it's supplied in the task tables by task. It's not necessarily identified by like each project and how much that equals. That's it's at a higher level than that.
Okay, so it covers what we're putting forward.
The ones that we have looking for identified additional funding, we would need to seek additional funds for these.
Look, I was just curious because we were talking about the NPO evaluation earlier, and I know that funding and the projects have to go hand in hand, so didn't know how that fit. But okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, very good. We'll move on to the next one. Gina said I should probably have an intermission because she's going to be on for, not kidding. She has a very brief overview of some projects.
So I decided to forego going through the slides. I think they're really self-explanatory. So if you do click on them later or now or at some point, you'll really get a good overview. But what I was going to present was the 6 new studies that our team has kicked off at TPO. We've got some great things underway and they're really interesting. So I'll just tell you what they are, but they're further explained in the slides, and then everyone will come back. It's going to be probably in the summer, sometime June or August, that you'll hear more details on those as we have them. But we're doing a health impact assessment of the 2045 LRTP Complete Streets project. So you're kind of looking at how those projects would impact chronic disease. Josh Barber is our point of contact for that one. Freight supply chain resiliency. So where are their vulnerabilities and what would happen if we had a potential disaster? And it's kind of funny, you got to prioritize like, oh, is it water supply or pharmaceuticals, which I think is a good thing that we might want to keep going during that time, and other things. So they're looking at prioritizing those and documenting. And Allison's that point of contact. We have a data sharing platform enhancement that we're working with the county on. So both Johnny and Sarah, who just left, are points of contact. Just looking at crash and travel time forecasting and including that in that new data platform that we have. The Tampa School Transportation Safety Study is kind of an addition to what we had done before, but a little bit more than that. But we're looking at another group of schools that have safety issues around them for both physical improvements, but also encouraging and education, like coming up with some programs for the parents and students and teachers and principals to enact. And Lisa Silva is our point of contact. The last two are the Plant City Canal Trail study, and just identifying ways to connect some of their already existing, parks and businesses and points of interest. So they'll have 3 alternatives that are analyzed for that one, and Wade is leading that. And the last project is the countywide bicycle network evaluation for the county. We're working together with Abigail, that's Wade and Abigail. We'll be looking at prioritizing programming where bicycle facilities are needed most. They're going to look at it overall of the county, but then kind of hone in onto 4 segments to take a deeper dive and actually do a feasibility look at 4 particular segments. And that's all of these are kind of wrapping up. Some are at the very end of the year, some in September, but you'll hear more about those as the study moves forward. Look at the slides. I took my time to put those together.
You can always, if you wanted to, if this next month's meeting is leaner, you can step through them and whatever.
It's okay.
All right, very good. Sounds interesting. Look forward to hearing about those too. Sounds like you got a lot going on. All right, I believe that covers all the planned topics. Do we have any old or new business? All right, I have one really brief announcement. After a 2-year absence due to COVID, our agency, EPC, will be once again hosting our Clean Air Fair on May 5th, which is Cinco de Mayo. It's right down here at Co Plaza from 11:30 to 1:30, so it's just a lunchtime walk-up event, but we typically have a transportation component because our air quality is so tight in. So TPO is usually there, HART's there, DOT sometimes there. So, there are, part of it is that elements, and the other thing is mostly about sustainability and general environmental stuff. So we encourage anybody to walk up. There's usually some free snacks and so forth. So generally ice cream, I don't know. I'm not in charge of it this year. Well, we were going to have avocados, but they've gone up in price quite a bit, so we can't afford them now. But it's actually not really themed that way. I'm not in charge of it as I have it in years past, so I'm more of a relayer of information. But it's being hosted again, so we encourage everybody to come. It'll probably be on coin at some point for anybody in the county to know the details. Any other questions?
Well, I just wanted to say our next meeting is May 2nd. I will have just finished the New York City's 5-borough bike ride. It's one of my bucket list things to do, so I won't be at this meeting. Hopefully I'll be feeling fine at the end. It's 40 miles. Ride very often, but we'll have capable staff here to help with the meetings.
All right, so as mentioned, May 2nd, I think, today. 2nd. Yes. Yes. Okay. No other business. With that, I believe the meeting is adjourned.